Parts of Israel are still on fire. The situation is still not completely under control, but it's definitely much better handled than it was when it started. So it's getting better. But that doesn't stop many on the, I mean, let's call them pro-Palestinian to be nice, side to basically applaud this, basically say, finally, Jews are getting what they deserve. Finally, this is God's punishment. This is nature's punishment for genocide. This is, they are basically getting everything they deserve, which again reveals the sort of the vile nature of the again so-called pro-Palestinian crowd. When civilians are being targeted, that's when they celebrate. That's why many of them celebrated October 7th, called it this Day of Independence, this sort of great thing, which again was targeting of, in a sense, or targeting anybody Hamas could get their hands on, and then either raping or mutilating or kidnapping anybody from the age of few months to as old as basically much older into 80s or maybe even 90s when it comes to the hostages they've taken, really not showing any sort of any humanity, but that's usually what happens when you are a terrorist organization that has no respect for any individual rights for their own citizens, let alone for citizens of another nation. Welcome to the reality show. Today we'll be talking about, of course, part of it will be the fires that are happening still now in Israel, especially in the Jerusalem area, but more on the reaction of the sort of general crowd in the West to this. And possibly, if we have time, we can talk about sort of what might have caused these fires. There are some suspicions that this is an act of arson, an act of terrorism. Some people were arrested, but it's sort of, I think it's still sort of a bit early to really make that call, but we can still go through that a bit today. Again, welcome to the reality show. Joining me today are Marco, Richard, and Anders. And I'll go to you, Anders, first. So have you been sort of following these fires at all? And yeah, what do you make of some of the reactions of like realistically the pro-Hamas crowds?
It's, I mean, the reactions are totally expected, of course. They grasp at every straw to kind of turn the tables. And for now, whether there's arson involved or not, I don't know that that has been determined yet. As you said, a couple of people have been arrested. It wouldn't surprise me if there's arson involved. I mean, this is a convenient way of sticking it to the Israelis. Just like it is for people inside the country. I don't know about the dynamics, how easy it is for people to do these things. It seems like arson investigators, they're pretty good at tracking down the perpetrators, not just in Israel, but in most Western countries. So it's unless you are on a not necessarily suicidal trip, but you can probably count on getting caught at some point or another. So that may prevent some people from doing it, but otherwise it's an easy way, of course, just to get out there in the woods. And Israel is a Mediterranean country. We know from many other Mediterranean countries that fires is part of what's going on in a climate like that is dry and where rain is very where you don't have much rain. Now we can talk maybe a little bit later about why they're so fire prone as they are, but let me leave it at that for now.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, let me go to you, Marco. What do you make of basically? It really does seem like that sort of Israel is going through another bunch of, how many plagues were there in the Bible? Because at the same time as there were fires, apparently there is now a sandstorm, and even now that I am in Israel, I can speak from personal experience. There was also a really sort of unexpected rain as soon as I came in, so maybe I brought it in. But also the rain itself was sort of like very sort of like sandy, what you expect, what you don't really expect from like a normal rain, what you usually expect when there is like a sandstorm or when there are sort of like a natural causes for it. But yeah, to go to you, Marco, what do you make of yeah, generally the reactions to this?
Yeah, well, as Anders pointed out, I mean, the forensic for this kind of incident is usually quite good. So we will find out what the cause was. But then again, it's a arid country. It's been particularly dry lately. The winds were strong, and probably just like here in the rest of Europe and the West generally, we no longer do any kind of bush management. We no longer intervene to the extent we used to do because nowadays we don't want to genocide the planet and manage it properly. So it occurs even in London a couple of years ago we had this kind of issues, and it's all due to not managing the landscape properly. And usually these kind of very wide fires are are mostly actually man-made. They're caused by arsonists. It happens in Greece all the time, in Spain. Every time you hear about a big accident, a big incident of fire engulfing a big massive area, you can guarantee there's always some arsonist involved. And in the case of Israel, we know very well that there are willing people that would set it alight on purpose. And of course, like a year ago or a year and a half ago, there was a massive fire in the north caused by the barrage of missiles from Hezbollah. So Israel is not new to this kind of events, especially if the government is caught with its trousers down, not having done its homework in terms of fire preparation, as we'll discuss later on.
And I think on that last point, you obviously got to recognize any subject when it comes to Israel has to be seen in the context of the fact that Israel is at war at the moment. And of course, it's also spending all its years in preparedness for war. And that diverts a lot of its time, energy, resources, lives. You've got all the fact all of the reservists are called up constantly. So all of the the people of young age, all their time and attention is diverted away. So it's not a surprise that a country finds it difficult then to manage some of the ordinary things that any country has to manage, which is still going to occur. And of course, when you have a protracted war that is needlessly protracted by the manner in which it's fought, because of its concerns about altruism, etc., as we discussed many times. Therefore, the war drags on far longer than it does, and the likelihood that it's going to overlap with other crises of whatever nature, it becomes higher, doesn't it? And then, I mean, it's hard to say, as you guys mentioned, whether it's terror arson or not, whether it's opportunist or not, and of course, whether these are Israelis with a pro-Palestinian bent or Arabs themselves, or both of which is possible. But you can certainly recognise that this is a very low skill level disruption, isn't it? It takes merely a match, doesn't it? It takes merely a lighter. This is the opposite of a pager attack in terms of skill level, isn't it? And therefore, that opens itself up to being the kind of opportunist bandwagon that people with a grievance against a country will exploit at the first opportunity. And the Twitter response to it kind of reflects that in the same manner, doesn't it? They've already got their built-in biases and grievances against Israel, so it's just a pile on as soon as anything happens. But obviously, to claim that this is a biblical set of plagues is obviously to ignore the fact of what causes the fires in the first place, and that's many factors, including stupid or evil humans, or both.
Yeah, and so we have, I guess let's cover the sort of fully the topic of is it arson or not, or to the extent we can sort of right now. Some people in the chat are saying, of course it was arson. I mean, when you try to think about it, like in the full context, the fact that it was Israeli Independence Day, again, if this was sort of like a natural thing, that would be really unlucky to have it on the one day, which is sort of again, this sort of like celebration of Israel independence. Again, as somebody in Israel right now, I was walking through the streets. People are celebrating, but the sort of celebrations were definitely down. In many places, they were completely shut down, basically because they couldn't really be fully safe. Right, the sort of the fire departments were completely on this case, on the case of fire. So if you had any event somebody somewhere else, you might not get actual fire department there in place. So a lot of things were shut down. So in that regard, sort of like Israeli Independence Day was, you could say, ruined to large extent. You had much less people out. Then we have sort of messages from the Telegraph groups of Hamas saying, "Go out and set fires." Now, this could sort of be, sort of like egg and a chicken question. Like, did Hamas say everybody go out now because now is the perfect opportunity to set up fires? If there are already fires, the more of them you set up now, the sort of higher damage is going to be, and it can get out of control. Or is it that this was some sort of a plan that was set up to basically, again, sort of ruin the Israeli Independence Day? And yeah, we have the fact that there were people already arrested in terms of that. We had there was one weird story. Apparently, officially, last time I checked, 3 people were arrested, and Prime Minister was saying that like 15 people were arrested. I'm not sure what exactly is going on there. If he just wrong information or something. But yeah, either way, people are arrested. So we'll definitely get an investigation. And as you mentioned, this is something that is easier to follow. But again, that it doesn't, I think, change much about the comments that are coming out. But yeah, I think we should give this a second. So yeah, Anders, what do you have any sort of additional comment on the sort of, was this an act of arson, an act of terrorism?
No, I don't. I think it would just turn into speculation. And of course, as you say, you have the Twitter messages and all that. I mean, it's so totally predictable. So it's, it's not even, I mean, maybe I should get upset, but it's in a way, it's almost comical when you read these messages about God's wrath and other things raining down on the Israelis. So yeah, no, I don't really have any comments on the particular case. What you can see when there was a blame game started, I think, whether they were using all the available resources. They brought in help from Italy and Cyprus, despite the fact that there were firefighting planes on the ground in Israel. Some of them were, I think, army-based, and others were private airplanes. And so it's the usual welfare statist blame game that is started, and now it seems like they're getting it under control. So maybe that will fade away in the background, but yeah, otherwise no additional comments.
Marco?
Yeah, at this point, I mean, it would be just speculation, but judging by the fact that the Palestinian largest propaganda organ, the BBC, has not actually talked about it, I suspect that perhaps the whole topic looks a bit too iffy for them to tackle. So I wouldn't be surprised if we were people have taken advantage of Palestinians have taken advantage of this fact, even if there was a natural event. Now, by saying go out there and start fires, it makes it look like their propaganda, their their invite to cause havoc has been heeded. So it's in their interest to make as much propaganda as they can, especially because, as you discussed earlier on with Alex, the Palestinians are very good at propaganda, very good at playing the victim, very good at seeing themselves as always put upon by somebody or something. And they're not very shy at all about, lashing back. And even on a perceived injustice, they're quite happy to commit some violence. We've seen it, it's part of their culture. It's not like it's a surprise.
And the BBC's lack of coverage comes within the context of the BBC focusing on fires across the world at any opportunity to claim that it's an example of climate change and look at what devastation is being caused by the climate, and yet is, you know, strangely unfocused on what's going on in Israel at the moment. Maybe they are biding their time, or maybe they're hoping to rework it to a different angle, and maybe that angle will come from some of the comments, you know, on Twitter. I think the opportunistic side of the response to it, whether it's actually started by you know, agitators or not, or whether that comes afterwards, is hard to tell. But of course, we know how quick the internet is to respond to all sorts of events, even like the attempted assassination of Trump. You know, the conspiracy theories and the follow-on insinuations after that are immediate. And why should this be any different? So in that sense, the internet is going to run with its own, you know, wildfire rhetoric and speculation, you know, without restraint. I think, but if you take the opportunistic nature of, you know, look at what the Gazans did on October the 7th. Once the fence and the border was broken, they were through and taking advantage of the opportunity to turn their anti-Semitism into violence and destruction. So would this be any different, that you could do the same in the form of lighting fires and causing havoc for the Israeli government? It's certainly plausible. But of course, the only time will tell as as you know, the exact causes are understood. But there's many people cheering it, and the cheering of destruction is always repugnant.
And don't forget that it's May Day, so your BBC News journalists are probably out demonstrating for social justice or something.
That's right, yeah.
We have Deborah in the chat saying, sort of apologizing for the arsonist for ruining my trip. So luckily, I'm not in the area where the fires are, and I think even when I'm planning where I go, I'm planning to stay in the sort of like the western side of Israel for the most part until I actually go to Jerusalem. But I'm planning to do that at the end of my trip. So hopefully, I think already sort of, I mean, really the fires were sort of like a horrific event, and it was really dangerous for a while. I mean, people had to sort of leave their cars, run down highways to basically run away. And my understanding is now at least parts of it have been cleared out. So I think you can go to Jerusalem now. But yeah, the fact is that fires are still on, and hopefully they'll be controlled. So let's stick a bit longer with the sort of propaganda aspects, because something I've seen sort of immediate is everybody, at least on X, has been posting this like a line from Haaretz, which is an Israeli newspaper, which was something like that this was actually Jews starting it. It was like Jews setting fire on some of the Palestinian villages or something similar to that, and that sort of just spread because of the wind or because of the way it was set up. It just spread to sort of the Jewish parts, sort of like west of Jerusalem, or basically the Israeli parts. And so I, you know, when I saw that, my first thinking was like, okay, I can imagine Haaretz actually writing something like that, but also this really does seem like crazy even for Haaretz. Again, like saying something like this with like the day off, like or like the night off, like the fires I think started like I think yesterday around like 5 or 6 or something like that, and yeah, so just to have the same night, or they have like the answer is crazy. Then I looked up at the Haaretz official Twitter account, and they did have that. They did have that line, something like Israeli settlers basically started these fires. They had like a link to an article, and if you click the article, it like points to some like website on Syria, or sort of like their articles on Syria. And you know, the question is like that article, that post from Haaretz is still on X. They are still claiming it. People are using it to spread propaganda, and nobody is seemingly like doing anything about it. So yeah, I mean, Anders, to go to you. I mean, we've mentioned sort of the BBC, thankfully, sort of putting their hands away from this now, which with the reporting we usually get from BBC might actually be better than getting anything from them. But yeah, what do you make of, again, both sort of Haaretz being complicit in this, basically putting out this line that doesn't lead to anything? Like, this is straight up sort of like a propaganda. Basically, this is straight up the sort of like the headline, right? You only read the headline, you don't read the article. So you don't actually need to write an article. You don't actually need to provide evidence. You just write a headline that you want people to share and spread. And yeah, this is basically how propaganda is made.
Yeah, I don't know what Hart's motivation is, but I mean, in the early days of something like this, you know, it's very easy for different conspiracy theories to be floated. So normally, I think when you have an event like this, it's good to take a kind of 48 to 72-hour break and just wait and see how the facts flash out. And I'm sure in the next couple of days or next few days, we'll find out if there's any truth to those allegations or not. But to your point, yeah, it seems a little bit suspicious. But again, at this point, it's speculation.
Marco?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I mean, it's clickbait, isn't it? Journalism nowadays is done on a number of clicks. How many people click on a certain link? So it's helpful to them having a controversial headline that will attract people's attention, and then perhaps divert you to something else where that you want to boost in terms of views. But it's I mean, the argument that Israel settlers started it and it kind of backfired. Well, first of all, you will know what you're doing when you start a fire. You will know what the wind direction. So it's unlikely you're gonna be caught out so blatantly. And also, if you look at the map, the distribution of the fires, most of them are just to the west of the Green Line between the State of Israel and the Judea-Samaria area, so the West Bank. I mean, you could argue that's deliberate. You could argue, well, that's probably the topography that facilitated the kind of spread. The fact that you had, winds from the north. Who knows? It's all speculation. But yeah, to make a statement, it's being caused by settlers trying to get the Palestinians. It even sounds like a blatant piece of propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, this is clickbait plus smear and slur, isn't it? I mean, whether people argue 1 second that it's Allah's wrath being avenged on Israel, and the next second that it's evil Jews who are behind everything bad that goes wrong, as their other alternative slur, it is neither here nor there. They're both irrational, arbitrary nonsense being spouted. I think more relevant are some of the things that you learn about the fire prevention stuff and how well or badly that's managed in terms of the ground and the management of dry ground, and that being the responsibility of the private owner as well. And it shouldn't always be assumed that government will come and wipe your rear end every second. You've got to make some effort yourself. I think there's the fact that I've read in some articles that typically you have one firefighter for about 1,000 people, and that in Israel there's one for about 4,500 people. So whether there is a lack of firefighters, and maybe that's an effect of the war or the difficulty in recruiting the kind of people necessary to do that difficult job. I don't know. There seems to be some difficulty with equipment as well. Particularly, there was one particular article I read about Black Hawk helicopters being cancelled by previous members of the government, like Ben Gvir, I think, cancelled some, and then some sort of confusion over what purpose they were for when they were supposed to be for fighting fires. And of course, all of those recriminations come out when clearly a problem is not being as well managed as it should be. And of course, whether people are simply, covering their own ineptitude or not, again, that in itself is hard to ascertain at this point. You do need, the dust to settle, essentially, the fires to be put out before you can, properly examine their cause. But all of it within the context of it's a difficult time for Israel, and of course, psychologically, it's difficult as well, isn't it? And the longer something that could be stopped, that is a man-made difficulty like winning the war, making sure the war is over through winning it, not through surrendering, that you could then concentrate on dealing with nature and the whatever nature is going to throw at any country, and making sure you're prepared for it.
Yeah, and we can sort of bring out the sort of preparedness and to talk a little bit about that. So yeah, I also read that. So basically, my understanding it was that Ben-Gvir has basically canceled or sort of got rid of some of the helicopters that were supposed to be basically for this putting out the fire, which hindsight is 2020. So it might just be sort of like an unlucky thing where you do like this is sort of like a historic fire when it comes to Israel. So it really like it's nice to sort of say like, hey, this thing was set up, somebody canceled it, and now it's not here. But you cannot really sort of predict when something is to happen, and this was set up by the previous government. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to preparedness, I think, as you said, sort of like nicely that yeah, it is sort of both like really annoying part is the fact that government has basically assumed the responsibility for doing this, right? And then when something goes wrong, it is sort of the government that has to deal with it. And we know government is not usually the best at dealing with pretty much any sort of crisis besides what their actual role is. That's the only thing they can sort of deal. They can deal with force. And you cannot deal with fire by force usually. You cannot just like stamp it. It is really even in sort of dealing with both before the fire start when it comes to sort of like controlled burning or those sort of like preparing the ground so when something does happen it doesn't go too bad. That is not force. That is actual thinking that has to be done to individuals. That has to be done by individuals. That's why this is like another example. Like when people want to try to make it about the sort of climate change, it's not. It's always the sort of the case for private property, and the fact that when you have this public property, this idea of that everybody owns it, then nobody is taking care of it. Why would you take care of something when it's sort of like collectively owned, right? So yeah, to go to you, Anders, what do you make of sort of, I guess, the general, more like a failure of the system, or what exactly is happening here when, sort of leaving aside if it was arson or if it was sort of like natural, the fact is that this was done and this has spread greatly, maybe more than people would have expected, even if it was like an actual attack.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I mean, this is highly regulated and managed by government. It is a central planning approach in a way on some level. So it often ends up with a blame game and a very inefficient management. So I think it's worthwhile here to take a step back and put on your capitalism as the only moral social system hat and kind of envision what it would look like in your shining city on a hill or in the capitalist Zion, I guess, in Israel. And so as you mentioned, there are public lands in a capitalist society. There would be very little, if any, public lands. And you would have private property owners, and in terms of firefighting, etc., that is something that would be privately managed. A lot of people mistakenly think that is a valid government function, but it is not. It would actually be something that, for instance, insurance companies would be very heavily involved with, contracting with private firefighting companies, so on and so forth. And then the other part that insurance companies would do is that they would provide, in their own self-interest, a lot of checks and balances on landowners who are looking for property insurance and property and liability insurance, because if you own a piece of land that is heavily forested and you don't take care of it, guess what? Your property premiums will go up drastically, because if a fire starts on your lands and it spreads to neighboring lands, there will be liability issues. And in a free market, that those checks and balances between private landowners, between insurance companies, would probably prevent most of this from happening at all in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, not even to mention Israel assuming the rightful sort of role of the government in the first place, just not even sort of stopping doing what they are not to do, but actually doing what they have to do, like taking care of Hamas, taking care of the Palestinian ideas that are threatening Israel. If that was solved, I think we could figure out a few fires without much problems. But yeah, to go to you, Marco, what do you make of the general setup?
Yeah, the scale of the intervention required to tackle this kind of fires, we're talking about, I think, about 5,000 square miles. Sorry,
No,
5,000 acres. 5,000 acres. I mean, it requires lots and lots of equipment. You just can't send a couple of firefighter with a hose and trying to deal with it. You need equipment, and the most effective equipment is airplanes that drop fire retardant and fire extinguishing liquids. And it looks like in this particular occurrence, the Air Force, the Israeli Air Force, prepared some planes for this use, but through different administrative cock-ups or perhaps internal politicking, this wasn't taken on. So there was a big delay in getting a significant response to tackle the fire in the first place. And this is, again, a failure of the government. But such a big task probably could be or should be a function of a government. Of course, even in a capitalist society, probably the government should have some sort of role for this, because it's about protecting individual property, protecting people. So perhaps there is some of that. My guess is that part of the problem is not just people setting fire or the political issue going on currently. I would guess that I don't know exactly the details of the Israeli government, but if they are captured by the same kind of policies that we are here in Europe, in the West, this kind of earth-oriented, climate-oriented politics, which effectively stop individual from dealing with, for example, dredging rivers or dealing with the overgrowth that tends to accumulate. In the past, for example, farmers were allowed to burn areas in order to keep the drier vegetation down, and that itself would have kept the risk of fires lower down. Rivers were dredged and they were kept clean. But now, in order not to upset the environment, you are not only discouraged but prohibited from doing this kind of stuff, which means that you have an increased number of floodings, increased number of fires, and all this kind of stuff would have been preventable. Yes, there is a degree of climate change that affects certain occurrences, but the candle rate and the violence that we're getting now, it's just man-made. It's caused by, again, the state forcing individuals to behave in a certain way, which goes totally against their own common sense and their own interest.
And I think one of the key aspects of managing any kind of emergency or disaster is your long-range thinking. It's not a reactive response to the latest crisis that's just happened, but the planning that you put in place. And with things like fires in Israel, I mean, there've been big fires in the past, hasn't there? 2010 was particularly bad. I think 44 people, I think, lost their lives in 2010 in the fires, and there were further fires in 2016, 2021. This is clearly a regular occurrence. But if it's given to the hands of politicians who are only interested in the political cycle, and therefore, they're interested in the votes for now, and the real short-range thinking, the opposite mentality is in place when it comes to being prepared for emergencies. And I think so clearly, I mean, when you've had previous events of the same thing occurring, you should already have learnt the lessons from them. You should already have worked out what the command and control structure is, what the equipment is necessary, who has which responsibility for which particular areas, and obviously, ideally, that would be a private operation, and that would be planned across somebody who isn't thinking about the political term, but is thinking, more about how to ensure that, as Anders, like you said, like an insurance company that wants to preserve the need not to pay out, is going to make sure that the mitigating measures are put in by those paying premiums in the first place in order to reduce the amount they have to pay for their coverage from an insurance company. So all of that would be much better. And of course, even with the system you've got, it's not being done in the way it should be. And I'm not singling Israel out for this, because I think that's true of pretty much every country in the world. All sorts of Western countries are prone to this short-range reactive thinking, and then the blame game that comes afterwards, when a lot of it was really quite apparent to anybody with any experience or any joined-up thinking across a period of time.
Yeah, and to sort of bring up an anecdote from my own country, something that sort of matters whenever something like this happens, and sort of the same example could be brought after the sort of the COVID era and the sort of systematic failure that happened during that in many ways, sort of not being prepared. I've seen a lot of sort of yeah, basically, well, to bring an anecdote from my own country, not specifically with COVID, but we had also assassination on our head of state, or prime minister. I'm not sure if technically he is considered a head of state, but basically there was assassination attempt on our prime minister, and actually an investigation into what went wrong. And basically he was actually shot like 5 times. He survived that, but he was shot like 5 times. Investigation was done. And apparently, investigation concluded that nothing went wrong. So the people who were protecting him, apparently they did everything right. So it's good to know that if you are a prime minister of Slovakia, when everything goes perfect, you'll only get shot 5 times into your chest, and you should hope that you survive. And I think something similar has to be thought of when whatever crisis happens is, the investigation that happens and sort of what is the result of it and what we get from. So, like we mentioned, sort of Ben-Gvir sort of like canceling those. Well, what was the right decision? Was something else supposed to be done? Or was that whole thing supposed to be scrapped and replaced with something different? That's something we need. And I think something we should hope for is whenever such a crisis happens, that the result is not nothing went wrong. And to bring up another anecdote, we have a guy sort of we have like a special position for researching the COVID pandemic, and the guy who is at the head of it doesn't believe there was a pandemic. So I'm sure we'll get great investigations out of that. Also, for somebody who didn't even think anything went wrong. So yeah, just to go around table a bit more. I mean, Anders, any last thoughts on this whole thing? Generally, this sort of like preparedness, I guess, for the future, or what needs to happen now? I mean, what needs to happen now is actually take control of those fires and completely extinguish them. But yeah, sort of like the day one after.
Yeah, well, I'm sure the Israelis, as imperfect as we think firefighting is in Israel and in the West, based on its heavy government involvement, I'm sure they will eventually get to the bottom of this and find out the cause of what started the fires. And yeah, hopefully it's if it indeed turns out to be Palestinians or Israeli Arabs who did it, or on the other hand, and if someone with Israeli sympathies set the fires for whatever reason, hopefully it will not become a trend, and that this is a one-off instance, and that it calms down, and life and property will not be jeopardized through fires. God knows there is enough of jeopardy for Israelis these days without fires.
Marco?
People can find me at Stack andersingemarson.substack.com, and my book, Think Right or Wrong, Not Left or Right, is available on Amazon.
Michael?
Yeah, well, first of all, you comment about COVID preparedness from the governments. Governments were very, very quick at locking down everyone. So that one leaked straight away. They were perfectly able to jettison individuals' freedoms as the very first action that they all did. So they were prepared, not for the right thing, but they were prepared. And then, yeah, you might well have as much investigation as you like, but then at the end of it, you have to either punish the perpetrator and learn from your lessons and put the structure in place that require you to be able, that allow you to be able to tackle a similar event in the future. And of course, this hasn't happened in the past. We know, for example, through a report from a few years ago that the fire response was about 30%, had 30% less equipment and personnel that they should have required. Richard pointed out the lowest number of firefighting personnel available in Israel. And of course, in the past, there were also instances where people were caught setting fires on purpose. But what happened? Well, there was some sort of investigation, and most of them got away scot-free. And so there is no point in grandstanding and show all this kind of we're looking into what's happened. If then in the end you do nothing with what you find out. So we're seeing how the Palestinians get away with murder and terrorist activity all the time. So why should they be stopped this time if they did it?
And I would just add that the people's reaction to events like this needs to still be rational and measured. And that includes, obviously, as we've mentioned, waiting for evidence, waiting for the facts to come to light and to be sought out to determine the cause. And that's essential. But I've seen lots of things mentioned as spin-offs, irrational spin-offs from the reaction to this story, which I think tend to be counterproductive. Things like describing the fact that people had to abandon their cars in certain stretches of road because of the fire as being reminiscent of October the 7th. Now, talk like that just simply diminishes the nature of October the 7th and is a stupid comparison between the two things. I recognize that Israel is having an extremely difficult period at the moment, but you need to focus on what the causes are and not subsume them into some sort of we're receiving, the curses of the universe on us in all forms at the moment. That is obviously nonsense. So, getting the cause and effect right for each individual event is crucial, rather than mixing it out in some muddle, which really won't get you anywhere. And then, of course, talk about locking down or curfews within certain areas to prevent people from being able to go out and therefore being prevented from being able to start fires. All of that is several lines of speculative, irrational nonsense when there are so many people who are potentially capable of starting fires like this, including Israelis. And you see all of the protests that take place at different times from different anti-Israel Israelis who may well also be within the mix or potentially within the mix. But until it becomes evident, you can't say that for sure either, any more than you can say that it's the Arabs or Palestinians themselves that have caused it. But all of that needs to be brought to light and needs to be brought to light honestly and clearly. And as you guys have mentioned and we've discussed, then learn the lessons from it to make sure that you can make it a smoother response in the future, because you're never going to prevent things like this from happening at all, because that's also an impossible goal. So you've got to accept that you will have disasters to deal with, but it's being able to deal with them in the most prompt and efficient way that really counts in the long run. And in terms of finding our work, you can always check out the Daily Objective, the sister channel to this, with short form material taken from the conversations on this channel, added visuals for added effect, and hopefully really get to the principles behind each of the issues that we talk about here. So please do check out, like, and subscribe that. Thank you.
We have a super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much. And a super chat from Jukes. Thanks so much. He says, thank you for what you do. Blessings. Thank you very much for your support. And yeah, I would only add sort of on the COVID thing and lockdown. It's I think that is sort of the prime example of unpreparedness, is the fact that, oh, we don't know what to do. Let's just deny people's individual rights, because that's if nobody produces, if nobody goes out, then nothing can go wrong. This is what China does, and again, the fact that we looked at China and Taiwan, and we took China as an example, is another sort of really scary sort of things about the future. Because again, Taiwan was one of the countries that avoided mass lockdowns because of their preparedness for exactly this kind of thing. So again, it's not like you cannot prepare for these disasters. With that, thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective, as well as the reality show. Until then, bye-bye.